My name is Christine Trocher, Director of Education for USITT. Welcome to another conversation in no more 10 out of 12s, Broadway and Commercial Theatre. I'm going to turn you over to Jessica Paz, sound designer and our moderator today. Jessica would like to introduce the panel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica, and we're here with a great group of folks. And I'm going to just go in order on my screen here and have them introduce themselves, starting with Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm a director. Is that enough said? Theater director person?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Happy to be here. Thank you for asking.
Thanks for being here. And Sadie.
Hi, I'm Sadie. I'm a production manager currently working with Juniper Street Productions. And previous to that, I did work in a little bit of dance, a little bit of opera, and a lot of long days at Summerstock.
Amazing. Thanks for being here. And Ruth.
Hi, I'm Ruth Sternberg. I'm the production executive at the Public Theater. I come to production management from stage management.
Amazing. Amazing. Thanks for being here. Lisa?
Hello, I'm Lisa Dawn Cave, and I am a production stage manager. Lastly, on Frozen, before the shutdown, I am currently the production supervisor for Frozen's nationally and internationally. And I come to stage management by way of dancer, singer, performer in my first career. I like to do a little disclosure. I'm in London, so if I freeze every now and then, forgive me, but my internet is a little shaky over here right now. But I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So far, you're coming through just fine. So just to start the conversation off, I know in No More 10 out of 12s on our website, we have a list of a number of theaters. I think we have 100 so far who have come to us saying that they wanted to be included on that list and have eliminated 10 out of 12s in their schedule. And this is obviously a conversation surrounding commercial theater and Broadway theater specifically. And I know that there are a number of productions as we come back and relaunch that are looking to not do 10 out of 12s in that relaunch tech schedule. So just, your general thoughts on how you feel about them philosophically, etc. It's certain how I feel about them since I am part of organizing of this group. So I'll just have the floor. Ruth, you want to start? I know that you've done some work down at the Public. And in particular, we just went through a tech process at the Delacorte where we didn't do any 10 out of 12s.
We didn't do any 10 out of 12s. And we were actually right before the shutdown, we had decided that we were going to pilot the idea of not doing 10 out of 12s and did a lot of work around the budgeting and what that meant for the institution. And it saves money. I mean, and I don't know how familiar everybody is with the off-Broadway contract, but the off-Broadway contract says that you can do 57 hours of tech in a week. So that, I mean, just by virtue of that number, everything that you're doing is in overtime. So by being able to limit the hours that folks are working, you're also increasing the productivity of the hours worked. And we were able to get that approved, which was a great thing. To do that, we didn't lose rehearsal hours, but we did lose 2 previews. And the question that is not proven yet, although I suspect that it will be proven in our favor, is the idea that we're going to lose income. But if you budget shows at under 100% to begin with, the idea that the audience member who would have come for the first or second preview that you eliminated isn't going to come back doesn't seem to make sense. So the question is, are you actually limiting the income potential? So we're waiting for that to be borne out.
And I know that the language around 10 out of 12s is actually only written in the equity contract, which is where it comes from, which was a protection against actors being made to work more than a certain number of hours a day, right? This was many, many, many decades ago.
Yes.
And so all of the other unions tend to then follow suit, right? And we build our breaks around that. Lisa, do you have any insight on that and what it takes, frankly, to as a stage manager, plan the breaks and the various times, because it's all different number of hours that each union member can work in a Broadway space?
Yeah, you are correct. And I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people are turning around and blaming AEA. You're the ones that are making us do 10 out of 12s. That is not true. Okay. Before 10 out of 12s came about, there was a free for all going on where people were just rehearsing as many hours as they wanted to rehearse. So AEA stepped in and said, we have to put a barrier and block this and put fences around it. And that's where it came in. So it was more of reducing more than 10 out of 12s that were happening is where we got to 10 out of 12s. That's number one for people to understand. And two, Jessica, you saying that, the unions are working around, the AEA 10 out of 12s that we have on our contract. And actually, again, it's not AEA that's saying that we have to do 10 out of 12s.
Mm-hmm.
It's the producers and the general managers that are saying, oh, we can do 10 out of 12s, so let's do 10 out of 12s. So again, it's not AEA going, here, it's 10 out of 12s, do them, right? So if they're there, people are going to do them. And as you know, there's some places that, even though they're on the books, they don't do them. Okay. So I just want to make that clear, first of all. And then going into next is that, yes, since they are there and people can do them, then what happens is that a schedule is made by the stage manager, and then the rest of the unions, we have to figure out what their schedule is around that, right? And again, all the unions' schedules don't line up to when breaks can happen, or how many hours you can work at what time, or can you work between 12 and 1? I mean, that doesn't even match. So it is a whole puzzle that has to be put together, to make a schedule for basically for tech, right? But what I have found is that, as a stage manager, most of the time we don't have a downtime, right? We don't have a downtime because either we're making the schedule during lunch or during dinner so we can possibly get out when everybody does, but that never happens. So at the end of the night, we're still in the theater working out the schedule for the next day, because we have just had a production meeting possibly where everybody's saying what is going to happen the next day. So I have found that, unfortunately, after the 10 o'clock mark is when people start going, drifting and getting glossy eyed and, tired, and we have found that those last 2 hours aren't as productive as we think that we are actually doing something in.
Right.
So my thing about it is what Ruth said. A lot of people, when you say get rid of 10 out of 12s, they think you're reducing the hours to work. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying reduce the hours. We're saying reallocate those hours somewhere else, and I don't, people have different forms. Let's stop at 8, let's stop at 9, let's stop at 10. But if I give you a figure and say, okay, instead of going from 10 out of 12s and then you do 8 out of 10s or something, that's 2 hours you take away from that and put them into those days. So instead of the 7 days that you can work under AEA for 10 out of 12s, maybe you work 8 out of 10s and you work 10 days instead of 7 days. And I'm sure, as Ruth says, you will find that more productive, and you probably will actually save money in doing it because the overtime is now decreased. So.
Right. And as a production manager, I'm going to pick on you next, Sadie. We asked you to put together some research for us on some Broadway shows, and Juniper was really gracious in getting us that information in a generalized form and not specifically about any particular production. And you built a big, wonderful spreadsheet for us that had a lot of information on it in terms of the amount of overtime cost incurred during a tech week when 10 out of 12s were included on both a series of plays and a series of musicals. And I thought that was really interesting information. Do you have anything to add on that?
As far as cost saving, and if I found a significant cost savings to that?
Yeah.
I'll say this, it wasn't the smoking gun that I was looking for. to be quite frank. When you
Agreed.
compare the cost of the rental of the space on a daily basis, and I'm speaking specifically about commercial Broadway in houses that the producers, the general managers do not own the space, right? It's the Niederlanders, Jujamson, Schubert's, etc. So on those days, we have to pay rent for every single day. So what I found is that the cost of rent versus the cost of the overtime of, it's usually 12 hours of OT when you look at that 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. period, it's a wash, quite frankly. It is a lot of overtime in actual dollars on a musical, depending on the crew size, the run crew size, it's between 20,000 and 40,000, depending on how big the show is, for that 12-hour period for X amount of employees to work. And I'm speaking specifically about the local one crew. This doesn't account for wardrobe. It doesn't account for stage management. There's so many other people involved, but local one specifically for those 12 hours, you're looking at between $20,000 and $40,000. But again, when you look at the rental of the space and what adding that 12 hours to another day does, it starts to come out as a wash.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what we're really looking at is, being that it's not the smoking gun that we may have hoped it would be, the overwhelming evidence of what it means to be overworked or be tired, be running automation, be on a fly rail, and just the ability to be a healthier human because you have less stress in your life. You're better able to meal plan. You are better able to care for families or elderly family members, children, et cetera, and so on, is interesting. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on it in terms of like yay or nay, as from a director's perspective? What do you think?
Well, it's so interesting to hear the economics of it, and that, to learn that it's a wash is a fascinating thing, that you can add the time into extra days. So I think my feelings about it have really shifted over this pause. I feel like, just speaking super personally, like I've sort of been in this race and working my ass off, basically, and working, and therefore everybody around me too. And, fearing losing time in a sort of an overly rushed way of working, because it never feels like enough time, or it rarely feels like enough time. And having sort of been really forced to stop, and for me, forced to stop at the first day of tech on a process, has just, I'm sure for all of us, it's a totally unique experience, just to have time, and to really be forced and allowed to, and invited to, asked to really look at the process that I've been functioning within and leading, to a degree for a while, and really interrogate it. And I don't want to do them. I think I've also long said we should have a 5-day work week, and then somehow been frightened in a way to kind of to like put that forward, just in terms of like producer perception of that way of thinking. But I really do believe that, somebody else said, like, we were working ourselves like really to the bone. And I have a daughter now. I'm just, it feels deeply unreasonable to ask of each other that we sort of sacrifice our personal lives in order to tell a story, and that I suspect the time won't be missed at all that it's hours of like panic. They're panic exhausted hours more than anything else. And that, the best ideas come after some dream time anyway. And I'm guilty of having fallen into that way of thinking, and grateful for having had a step away to look at it. So I'm grateful that you guys are really pushing this issue.
From a designer's perspective, and I'm not on this panel, but I wanted to add this to maybe as something that people don't know, right? When you're a designer, you move from project to project, right? So essentially you are in 10 out of 12s for a week of tech. You're in 10 out of 12s for all 3 weeks of previews, or however many weeks there are, right? Because there's the preview process. And then you leave previews for that show and you go to the next show where you're in 10 out of 12s for a week and 10 out of 12s for another 3 weeks of previews. You don't ever get to be in the show is open now I just need to do 8 shows a week, which is also an incredible amount of work. I'm not in any way diminishing that, but you do get your afternoons back, or you're not in until you get your full Sundays off. You do your double on Sunday, or maybe your Sunday matinee, and then you're not back in the theater until Tuesday night. Designers never get that. And some designers bounce between shows, depending on schedules for productions. So essentially, yeah, you're living that schedule every single day, which means for me personally, and I don't even have children, I'm single and I don't have kids, I have cats. but even just for myself, being able to provide my own self-care, to cook meals at home. The one day off a week that I have is dedicated to dropping my laundry off, sleeping as many hours as I possibly can, and like having a little bit of downtime, but it doesn't allow for me to cook meals for the entire week. So this forces me to then have to eat out, which means that I'm not eating as healthy as I could if I were planning my own meals. Or it means that, I'm grasping at every moment of sleep that I can get, because there isn't enough of it. And often, it's not uncommon to get only 6 hours of sleep a night, which is not very healthy in the long term. In the short term, people can overcome lack of sleep, but when it's perpetual, at the beginning of the pandemic, for instance, I think that I probably slept for like 12 or 14 hours a day for 3 weeks just to catch up. But what do you think is necessary to convince, or what was necessary to convince others in your organization, Ruth, to make the change? And I think some of the change hasn't occurred yet because we hadn't taken the time yet as an industry to really research what it would mean. We just were like, well, this is how it is, so this is what we do. And finally, we started taking that time to find out these answers. What was the challenge?
Well, I think the challenge was first trying to figure out how to sell it to directors for exactly the reasons that Rebecca was saying, trying to make sure that they didn't feel like we were cheating them out of their work hours. And the schedule we came up with actually worked out to be an average of 7.5 hours a day for 8 days of rehearsal. And if you're going to be in costume for every one of those sections of the day, it worked out to be 1 more hour of actual work on stage. So we were able to say, no, we're not taking time away from you. We're actually giving you more work time. So that was okay. And then the idea of where are the places, because we were trying to figure out, as Sadie was saying, what is the value of the rental of that house, not looking at ticket sale loss, but looking at, what are we going to have to spend to be able to use the house? We were looking at it in terms of non-sales of tickets. And we came up with a lot of different areas that made a lot of sense. One is the idea, and I think any manager knows this, that there's a point at which if you have employees working more than 60 hours in a week, some of us refer to that as stupid time, because you're paying time and a half and getting not a whole hour's worth of work for what you're paying for. So there's an upside to that because you're getting a higher quality of work for the hours you're paying for. The other thing that happens to us, and I don't know if this is true in commercial theater or not, but because of the way, if you're doing a 10 out of 12, because Actors Equity Association says the end of the day is midnight, it meant you start at noon. If you have work calls before noon, we have to pay a 4-hour minimum. We have to make sure the stage is ready for the actors to get on the stage. We were paying a 4-hour minimum for work calls, and we couldn't get 4 hours of work in there. So now we actually can get the 4 hours. So we're making up probably roughly, 30% more work for the same amount of money we were paying. And then the last piece of it, and I assume this is up to individual producers, we pay for cabs after midnight if somebody doesn't get out until midnight. We eliminated the need for that cost. So there are all these things that came into play. And I think that the biggest advantage will prove by the creative team because they're not exhausted. And I think that most of us have had the experience where you do a 10 out of 12, you work till midnight, and the next day the director comes in and says, I want to do that last scene again, because they were exhausted by the time they were done. And so was everybody else who was helping them with the work. So I actually think that the benefits are going to be quite positive. And I'm still touting this, so nobody decides that we shouldn't go forward. We've announced that we're doing it, so we will. But I don't even think we know how big the benefits are going to be.
Ruth, I 100% agree with you. While it might be an economic wash on paper, you're spending that 20 to 40,000 for what productivity, right? So while on paper it looks like there isn't a savings in that line necessarily, the creative savings, the productive time savings, that is something that can't be measured beyond saying, like, did this show run for 6 weeks versus 8 weeks? How long do they run if they have more 10 out of 12s? But all of the shows, at least that I've been a part of, which is about 12 at this point on Broadway, they all do the same amount of 10 out of 12s. It's either 6 or 7, be it straight play or musical. And that time does not lead to how long the show is going to run. So that isn't the moniker of, is this productive time? And it can't be measured. But we've all seen people sleeping during breaks because they're exhausted. We've all known someone who has slept way past their call because they just passed out when they got home. Like you were touching on, there are work calls before the 10 out of 12 ever begins. So for production management and for the crew, it's a 16 to 18 hour day. And then the production meeting at 12:30. And then a lot of creatives are expected to go out and continue sidebar conversations outside of the theater and other locations, right? And then by the time we all get home to whatever borough we live in, it's 2, 3 in the morning. And then we wake back up at 5 to catch the train and get back in by 8. So sure, economic wash, but mentally, I don't think that's a wash. I think, like you're saying, I think we'll see those returns creatively and productively if we start to adjust our schedule in a way that's more humane.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question in here, Jessica?
Of course. Yeah.
When you did the production, calculus of the hours for the crew, right? When you said the crew local one was 12 hours, right? Did you measure that from when you just mentioned that they start at 8 and go to midnight? So it's 16 hours. What 12 hours were you measuring? Or were you measuring yes. 16 hours?
It's 12 hours of overtime so a 10 out of 12, the only thing that delineates it from 7 out of 8.5 is the 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. hours.
Gotcha.
So those 12 hours are 6 days at 2 hours of overtime each day.
Gotcha. Okay. And Am I still on? Did I freeze? No, I didn't freeze. Okay. Can I ask this another question? Sorry, this just helps me go into something else.
Yeah.
And this is for Ruth, maybe. Now, I always come into the production, right, after the producers and everybody have sat down and already made the schedule, has already said, this is how much rehearsal you're going to have. This is how much 10 out of 12s you're going to have. And some of them are longer than what is scheduled 7. I've done 2 and 3 weeks of 10 out of 12s before I've gotten into previews for big shows. Like when I did Rocky, I think we were in rehearsal forever in tech, right? So when you sit down at the beginning and say, okay, we're going to do this amount of rehearsal and this amount of tech, and then we're going to go into previews, how is that determined before you actually have a show in rehearsal? And the reason I'm asking that is because when I've gotten feedback going, well, now we can't have enough previews, but you didn't even start anything. So why can't you at the beginning just budget and say, we're going to have this amount of time, and still have the amount of previews you want to have? I'm just trying to understand how that is made at the very, very beginning before everybody even gets together in the room for the first day of rehearsal.
I mean, I can tell you how we do it, which is that we basically said, we looked at what our standard schedule had been. Our standard schedule had been 1 week of tech with 57 hours of rehearsal in that, and then 2 weeks of previews. And then we just said, okay, so now we're going to do a week of tech in the first week. We're going to tech Tuesday and Wednesday. First preview is going to be Thursday. And starting with that first preview, we do 2 weeks, so that opening would then be the following Thursday or 2 Thursdays after that. Because I felt like it was very important when I was proposing a schedule to be able to not have anybody object. The key for me was to make sure that I was accounting for everyone getting the time that they need to make the show the best that it can be, to give it its best artistic advantage, right? So I started from so that nothing was taken away. And sometimes we have shows that actually preview longer depending on the new play and where it is and so many other things, but started with the standard schedule and just expanded it out. And what that meant was we lost, from a sales point of view, we lost 2 performances. But then you have potential extensions, so you're not necessarily losing. I mean, I think that's not an issue on Broadway because the only thing that's the limiting factor is ticket sales going the wrong way, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, Rebecca, which is, as a director, the fear of losing time. Is it fear of losing time with actors on stage in tech, or fear of losing time in general? And the reason I ask is because in terms of not having 10 out of 12s, I think some designers have a fear of them losing time as well, right? But just because there isn't a 10 out of 12, like in my mind, it actually means that they have more time in the morning to use as they wish, to focus lights, create sound cues, and it means that work is actually then happening on site during work hours, as opposed to at 2 a.m. when I've just gotten home from a 10 out of 12 and I need a new sound cue for tomorrow. I now don't have to use my personal time to create that new sound cue. I can do that in the theater in the morning when I come in. So for me, it feels like I would actually gain more time to then be more ready for when we do get actors on stage. So I'm just curious which part of the fear.
I mean, I think if you had asked me that question a year and a half ago, I would have said a very different thing. I think we have, like, the culture of our industry is set up to create a sense that you have to grab at every hour you possibly can. And that if you don't do that, you're not doing the very best work you can do. And I definitely fell into that way of thinking. I really, I'm very aware that was wrong now. So I don't have that. I would have had that fear of losing the hours. I really don't. I feel so differently about just about how time functions in a creative space, and about time, sort of how much you can get done if you're wise about how you're using your time. So I guess I'm just saying I'm not scared of losing it. I'm scared of I do fear the idea that producer, like that, because the economics of the business model are really complicated and tricky, that there will be questions about, we're going to we're taking out all 10 out of 12s, but we're not adding you any extra days of tech. That would suck. And that would be problematic. But I think like the total win, I mean, Sadie, I think you said it's not a wash, which is so true. I mean, if you take off those 2 days at the end of the day and you add them to another day, it's just the volume of growth that can happen with healthier minds, with an added night's sleep. Like, I think the time away, what I and we forget too much, or had forgotten too much, is, the value of like dream time, of living, and like the how ideas and art, the artistic process is happening in those spaces. So, and it also, for way too many people, it makes the idea of sort of living with a family really an impossibility. That's not cool. I did notice this comment, which I thought was interesting, about the production meetings. I don't know, Jessica, if that's an appropriate thing for me to bring up, but
absolutely, please do.
I mean, I wonder if anybody has an idea about how we could do those better, even if it's an 8 out of 10. Even at an 8 out of 10, are those effective at the end of the day? And maybe if we didn't have the midnight start, which is insane, they would feel really different. But
I can tell you how they do it in London, and at least at the National Theatre. I don't know that this is always true on the West End, but at the National, they don't do any 10 out of 12s. The day begins at 9 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. for the work call, which ends at 1. If there is an emergency or more hours are needed, they can add a 5th hour. And that's actually a completely separate stagehand crew from the show crew. So the show crew never works from 8 in the morning till midnight or whatever the end of the day is. It's a completely separate set of people, including the sound people. Where in New York, the person who's mixing the show has been in the theater from 8 in the morning and is expected to do something very, very complicated at 8 o'clock at night. Same with stage management. Like, how you can call a show after you've worked a 10-hour day is just absolutely mind-boggling to me, or for anyone that, for that matter. So they have this crew call from 9 to 1. I would come in at like 10:30 or 11 with my A1 to do notes on a fully checked out sound system already, like someone else did that. We would take a break from noon to 1 and have lunch, come back, get ready for tech, which began at 2 with the actors. I don't remember if they were called at 1:30 to get into costumes or not, so forgive me for not having those details. But we'd start on stage with them at 2. We'd go till dinner, which is a 5-hour chunk or 4-hour chunk. Dinner break was an hour and a half long. We came back. There was a half an hour before actors got on stage. The day ended at 10 p.m. and the production meeting was limited to 30 minutes. So we were out of the theater and on the sidewalk at 10:30. And we had no choice about the length of that production meeting because they actually shut and locked the theater.
And it's a 5-day work week, right? Also. Now, I don't know about in tech, but rehearsal. I'm about to rehearse something there, and it seems it's a 5-day work week. No, Lisa, am I wrong?
Not for me. I'm here in London with Frozen, and no, we still have the 6-day work week. But we, as Jessica said, there are no 10 out of 12s. Right. We do a regular, we can do lengths, but right now we're going into the theater at 1 and everybody's out by 10. The actors, that's the actors. They come in at 1, they have to be out by 10. That's what we're doing. And that is actually adding an hour onto the schedule because right now they're paying overtime for that. But if we didn't do that, it would basically, you would be doing a regular 7 out of 8.5 hour day here. Yeah.
So I just found that it was really fantastic in terms of my ability to have dedicated notes time with my mixer in the mornings. We had anywhere from an hour, hour and a half. You had the option of coming in to take care of something that is problematic and the time to do it without feeling frenzied or like you would never get that dedicated time, which is a product of 10 out of 12s, is always feeling like, especially, think about it. And again, this is just the sound department. During the week of tech, on the days that there are 10 out of 12s, for a musical, there's also a band seating and a band sound check, which brings the sound department in for 8 a.m. to noon for 2 days in a row, prior to a 10 out of 12, which means that on stage, no other department can do any notes. The sound department loses the ability to do anything other than tech and sound checks for band for 2.5 days. So if there are any problems, there's no way to fix them. And time actually becomes more constrained. Whereas if you have a shorter work day, there's the option to come in the morning to do something problematic. There's the option, if there's a problem with scenery, to do an overnight carpentry call or an overnight paint call. And that happens every once in a while, but there's that breathing room, I have a question in my little document here, and this is it can be hypothetical as well. But what has been the greatest benefit, or perceived will be the greatest benefit, of making the change in the room or outside of the room in terms of productivity, creativity, and efficiency with a shorter workday, which we've been talking about. But what does it mean also for note taking and implementing notes, especially for teams working in real time, like stage management, lighting, sound, projections, and other media? And I think that's probably directed at you mostly, Lisa.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Tagging on to the production meeting, because that's also getting notes, right? I do know that, if we do a shorter day, I do believe the benefit of production meeting is at the end of the day. I've done shows for people that have, in order not to stay any longer afterwards for 10 out of 12, they cram the production meeting on the last break, right? Which means now you don't get the break that you needed, the 10-minute break. And then that 10-minute break has now turned into 20 minutes. So now you've lost 10 minutes on the stage. And the stage management team is the team that's going crazy because they've lost the time, the break. They're trying to take the notes that they were just given, and you have the director and everybody yelling at you, can we start? So it's like, hold up, And unfortunately, I've been around for a very, 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 very long time. So I have no problem in telling a director or a choreographer to back up, okay? But there are some stage managers that don't, and that's who I feel for, okay? But the note taking, you're absolutely right. When do you have time to get those notes, right? Once we get them, then we have to type them up, right? Stage management that are on deck usually have to give those notes to the crew, the running crew that they're working with on the deck, so they can have fresh papers the next day to be able to implement whatever the notes were. And basically you're up all night doing those notes, or you come in very early in the morning to type up those notes because you want to give them so everybody's fresh and ready to go, because that's everybody's goal. Let's start on time. Let's be fresh and ready to go. But at getting that fresh and ready, you're never there because you've just stayed up all night trying to prepare for that. You know, the other thing that I just want to put in there about the notes and everything is when Ruth mentioned about how they've, you know, said, okay, at the end, they realized that now they don't have to pay for cabs, right? I know for me, I will not take a job anymore unless the management says that they're going to put me up in Manhattan during the entire 10 out of 12s and they're going to pay for it. That's a cost in itself. But that's my first thing I say when somebody calls me for a gig, is that's what you have to give me. And because, I mean, yes, I chose to live in Long Island. I know that's not your problem, but you want me to do your show. So now it is, basically, you know.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No. I just wanted to say that, you know, so that's another cost that is right there that's happening, you know, that people don't factor in either. Okay.
And on some Broadway shows, there are turnaround time issues, and maybe you've seen some of this, but I know that on one show that I worked on, our production audio person lived too far away to make the turnaround time, and then they put him in a hotel during the tech and preview process. It's just another example of how, that's another additional cost. Whereas if we had a shorter day, the turnaround time for that person would have been fine. Right. But I wanted to bring up a comment that Victoria Schilling put in the chat, which is our current culture promotes a scarcity mentality. And then Katie Cottingham added to that comment later and said, how do we approach shifting that scarcity culture when the work yourself into the ground equals being professional is taught so early in training and entry level work? I mean, it's always been, you know, the show must go on, right? And you, if you're the first in the building and the last to leave, you get the promotion. If you're the harder you work, the more valued you are. The more I certainly know early in my career, the more that I said I sacrificed, or the amount, like the little sleep that I was working on was something that I like held as a badge of honor. And I don't feel that way anymore. You know, do you all have any thoughts on that? How to shift it?
You know, Jess, I have so many thoughts about that. I'm hearing this conversation and I hear it's the schedule, you know, how is it created? Who is doing it? Like we want to point to who the culprit is of the 10 out of 12, who's responsible for this madness, who's treating us this terrible way. And the sad fact of the matter is that we're all treating ourselves this way. We're all doing it. And I say that because, yes, you know, we get a budget from the producing team and the general managers. They get that money from investors, right? People who are giving this money. We take that money and we say, okay, how can we stretch this money as far as we can go to get the best possible product? And a lot of times, you know, I know at Juniper Street, we'll propose schedules that don't include 10 out of 12s or that include fewer 10 out of 12s because we see the crew every day. We know how tired everyone is. We understand that having riggers working 80 feet above actors and actresses exhausted on 3 hours of sleep is not the best way to run a rehearsal or to run a work call. Like, we all as a collective understand that this is not the right thing to do, but we go to these production meetings at 1 a.m. And the first thing that I get a question about after I've gone through the list of what happened for the day is, when can I get my time? How much time do I have? What is my on-stage time? Who is on stage with me at that time? I can't work with them. I have to be quiet on stage. I have to be loud on stage. We have to replace the turntable tomorrow, right? Like, at the end of the day, we all collectively come together and we fight for time at the end of the night, which creates this cycle that continues. And whenever we propose these schedules and we say, okay, maybe we'll do one less 10 out of 12 this time, it's not the producers who push back on us. It's the directors, it's design, it's people who their art is on the line and out in front of the world to see. It's the people whose names are on the forefront who hold the pressure and the weight of trying to produce something great and something that's going to make change overall. But in this moment of us all trying to produce greatness and to reflect art on stage, we're killing ourselves and we're slashing ourselves in order to serve the public. But what's happening is that we're not getting there because we're just too exhausted. And like they're saying in the comments, that starts from when you enter into theater in the first place, because it's an after-school program for most people. If you're not in an affluent area, it's something that you do in your free time. And then you go to your community theater and you do that in your free time. It's something you slave for. You get your homework done and then you go to theater. In college, you get all of your core studies done, right? And then you go and you do your 10 out of 12 in college. And you just slay yourself for the art. And this may be more general or it may be just specific to me, but I think a lot of people come to theater because they don't fit in elsewhere. A lot of us come broken and we are looking for refuge in a place that guarantees us empathy, that guarantees us like-minded people, that guarantees us a family. Mm-hmm. And you take that family and you commercialize it and you make it for profit. And then we're back to that cycle where we want to share, we want to help, we want to spread messages, we want to infiltrate the world with art in 6 to 8 weeks from spotting to opening. We want to change the world in a month and a half. And
Can I jump in? Can I jump in on that real quick?
Please.
Sadie, your words, great. I disagree with a lot of what you just said. I'm going to be true here.
Yeah, please.
Okay. One, I think that we all, at the end of the day, are reaching out and saying we want this time, this time, this time, because we don't have the time. And when it is put upon to say, let's take one, less day of 10 out of 12s or less 1 day period from a tech schedule or rehearsal schedule, I, as a stage manager, really, I know that production stage managers by contract, and this is in sitting across the table in negotiations, are only hired right now 2 weeks before a commercial, show on Broadway, a musical I'm talking about right now. And I really find that it is not really good for any show when the stage manager is not even present or in conversations about what the schedule should be, and is handed a schedule and saying, okay, fit everything into this. And usually the stage management team is the team that has had conversations with the director and or the choreographer, their vision and what they're doing, and have the experience to know how much time is going to take for what, right? But we're usually handed a schedule and say, fit everything into this. I think a conversation that's had way ahead of time should include more people, so people can say to them, like the sound designer or the set, everybody can sit in that conversation and have an idea of what that show. You only have little pockets of that. We all need to be together to figure out what that schedule is going to be. I have sat in a meeting one time, I know we're running out, one time where I was with designers and the producer, and the producer said to everybody sitting there, this is the schedule for tech. And I want everybody to say that this is going to work because you're not going to get any more time. And everybody just sat there. And I raised my hand and I said, well, I'm going to speak. I said, I wasn't in any conversations with anybody in this room when y'all made this schedule. So no, I am not going to say that this is going to work in this time frame that you've just handed me, because I don't even know that, right? So a lot of people that I think should be part of those conversations might help inform how much time will be needed and or to do things, and how you can allocate those hours and them not having to be those long days. You're not taking time away again. And we're all going to keep saying that over and over and over. We are reallocating those times into a different way or in another day, right? And I just want to, it just makes me, and the thing about, why people get into the theater and how it's a side thing, unfortunately, I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because personally, for me, theater has just been anything and everything I've ever wanted to do in my entire life. So it's never been a side gig. It's never been an afterthought. It's never been a refuge. It's just been the love of my life, basically. So when I look at that, when I look at it that way, I see it from a different lens of why I'm doing this and why I want to create the stories in 6 weeks to change the world, because it actually can happen.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with you, Lisa. And to clarify, I don't mean that it's a side thing. I don't think for any of us, we wouldn't be in the positions that we are if it was a side thing for any of us. But I'm saying one of the questions in the comments was, from an early age, we're taught that you have to hustle, hustle, hustle. And in my opinion, that's because for where I grew up in Texas, and the arts are not, a lot of people don't really care here, if I'm being completely honest. It's hard to get people to care about the arts from where I grew up. So it wasn't a side thing for me. It's just that the only time that I had to do what I wanted, which was my passion, which was theater, was in my free time at the end of the day, after everything else that I had as a student was complete. Then in the wee hours, that's whenever I got to rehearse, when I got to go to the theater, when I learned my lines, right? All of those sorts of things happen in your free time, in your spare time. And this, of course, is not everyone's experience, but I think in education, in a lot of places where arts are not at the forefront, the people who are trying to claw their way up to a place where they're able to work at this level, they have to do it in their free time rather than as in their main focus time, if that makes sense.
That was true for me as well. I didn't even know theater was something that I could do. I was enamored with it in high school and went to productions, and it didn't occur to me that there was even the possibility that I could do this work until I found a community theater and started working there. And I spent every waking second that I could in that place, doing everything I could after I worked a whole day job, because that was what paid me. The community theater work did not pay me. And then all of a sudden I found myself finally, after many years of, clawing my way through small theater jobs that didn't pay. And I have my opinions about that, which is not part of this panel, but, I finally found myself able to make a living doing what I love, but it was a long road. We have time for some questions from everybody, and I see a couple coming in. And from Patricia, which says, how do we see the costume department design notes fittings be addressed for director producer requested changes during the tech and preview days in terms of fittings, etc.? Like, how do we fit that in? That seems to always be a bit of an issue. Like, how do we allocate that time better? And I think one answer is shorten the day, and then there is more time to be given out, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
That's because you and I share the same mind sometimes. Specifically at the Delacorte, Ruth, because it's the first time I've seen a show not do 10 out of 12s. Were there any, and you spent a lot of time there because I saw you. Was there anything that stuck out as like, this is better, here's a benefit?
I think in general that people weren't as tired as they would have been if we were doing 10 out of 12s. I mean, and the Delacorte is a really odd place. For those of you who don't know, it's an outdoor theater in New York City, which means 10 out of 12s are kind of useless to begin with because you can't tech when the sun's out, right? So you basically have more spacing time during the day, which can be helpful. And we're on a LORT contract, so we normally would do 2 10 out of 12s. So we basically lost 4 hours and we added a day of tech. So I think it was very smart that we added a day of tech, but then you add rainstorms into it, and how much time did we lose? I mean, well, we lost less time than we would have lost if we had done only 6 days because we had time that was rained out. So I think that's a hard thing to say to figure out. But I think because we do have to go till midnight, because your only valuable time is basically 8 o'clock to midnight when you can see lighting cues and hear sound, as the audience will hear it. I just think that people not being as exhausted as they would have been. I think the creative work is better, but of course, all of those, that's all subjective. So I don't know, how to measure that. I'm much more interested in being able to look at it when we're downtown in downtown indoor theater spaces. I think it's going to become a lot more apparent.
Someone, Katie asked, what perspective will get through to more people at this point, the financial, the creative, or the health concerns? What do you all think?
Depends on who your audience is.
But in terms of, convincing producers or general managers that this is the right way to go, this group was born a bit out of We See You White American Theater, which called for the end of 10 out of 12s, and we were like, we're gonna take this one issue and run with it. And frankly, we've received over 700 testimonials from theater workers. Some of them are on our website. We've gotten over 1,500 signatures on our petition. Those are pretty staggering numbers in only a few months' time. And we have plans for what we're going to do with that information and that petition, which we're forming now. But I guess I wonder from all of you, like, what is the one thing that you would say to someone higher up in theater who controls these factors? What would you say to them to convince them that it needs to change?
I can say I go to humanity basically, and I will go for that inside feeling of heart. To be very honest, I think all of us, as Rebecca said, this year, with everything that's gone on this year, the pandemic that's gone on this year, the racial injustice that has opened everybody's eyes, what's out there, has been there forever, but now everybody has actually said, oh, now I see it. I think it's honestly humanity, and how you treat each other is the core of who we are as people, and I think honestly, that's the direction I'm going in, is to tell people. I understand about the finances, but you know what? I believe people, as you say, people live sometimes in their means. If you make $50 million a week, you're going to live like you have $50 million a week. If you what I'm saying? That's what happens, right? So I just think if we look at each other and see what it's actually doing, and it balance that, is it worth it? And as we are finding out by facts, is that it's not, and you actually are not getting what you think you're getting, and theater has changed. I mean, many, 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 many years. I mean, me and Ruth, I'm going to put you with me, going way, 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 way back. I mean, I've been doing Broadway for over 25 years, and, we change when things are presented to us. And you know what? People think it's hard when it's presented, but it really isn't. When you start doing it, there were times way back when we did not put costumes on the first day of our tech. We didn't do that. We waited, and now it's like, that's what you do. You put your wig and you're like, whoa, so you change when things come to you. And I think that when everybody says we can do this and not look at the negatives, but look at the positives about this, because that's what it is. There are positives about this. There aren't really any negatives about taking away 10 out of 12s. There aren't any negatives about doing that. And once we realize that and say that and commit and just do it, that's what we do as creative people. All of us, is we make things happen. And if we say we can do this, we actually can do this. And let's think of the humanity that we're putting out there for everyone. And then that's where I'm going to go for, basically.
I think that that's a nice way to kind of wrap things up, unless anyone has anything else they want to add. Katie is clapping for us. Thank you, Katie. And unless anyone has anything else to add, I just want to thank you all so much for coming. This has been a really wonderful conversation. And I didn't even have to ask many of the questions that I had written out because the conversation led us into all the directions I wanted to go. So thank you very much for that. Yay, us.
And I want to thank everybody. Thanks for joining this conversation, for having this conversation. Thank you, Jessica, Rebecca, Sadie, Lisa, and Ruth for joining us today. Thank you for allowing USITT to host this. For more information, I know you're going to have 3 more conversations in the No More 10 out of 12 series, one on July 28th, the other August 18th, and you're going to wrap up the series on September 1st. So be on the lookout on the USITT website for the information, for the links for those conversations. Thank you again, everybody. Enjoy your evenings, or in Jessica's case, her entire day is ahead of her. So good for you.
Thank you. It is 6 a.m. now. So thank you all for coming. And I'm so happy I stayed up very late. And now it's very early to see you all. So thank you so much. I'll see you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.